welcome to Pittsburgh Sportsline. We have a great show scheduled for tonight. I'm Al Levine, the talking machine. We have Mike Migliore, Smokin' Jim Frazier, and we have a special guest here for you tonight. We have a boxing ring announcer who's legendary, Andy Sebastian. And we're going to take the show off and start with what's on our minds, and Mike Migliore is going to give us a start.
Well, on the way to the show tonight, I was listening to a particular sports talk station on the radio, and some yo-yo called in and said that it's time for Joe Paterno to retire. My question is why? I mean, Penn State's only, lead in the Big Ten. They're first in the Big Ten this year. The guy has not yet had an unsuccessful season. He runs a decent program. He's successful. He wins. He recruits. And while he might not be the top program in the Big Ten year after year after year, he makes a good showing year after year after year. Is Pitt ever as good as Penn State? Is West Virginia ever as good as Penn State? No. Penn State's solid. They're in the Big Ten. They're going to stay in the Big Ten, and they have a good coach. Let the man stay there as long as he wants to or until he dies, because nobody's doing any better. And ask yourself this. If you were a successful football coach, would you want to be the guy that replaces Joe Paterno? You wouldn't be there very long.
Thanks, Mike. Let's go to Smokin' Jim.
And I agree with Magic Mike that Paterno coach as long as you want to, buddy. You know, a lot of people think that the greatest football player to ever come out of northern Colorado was Vincent Jackson, wide receiver of the San Diego Chargers. That's not true. In 1999, I scouted a young man who had nearly 50 career sacks. I thought could have been one of the all-time great defensive ends in a 4-3 defense in the National Football League. He sacrificed most of his career to play in the 3-4 defense. I'm talking about my main man, Aaron Smith of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Unfortunately for Aaron, his season has come to an end again on injured reserve. And I was going to tell Aaron Smith at some point this season that what I tell a lot of players is here's the time that you retire. It's not about the money. It's not about the fame. When you don't recognize yourself on film anymore, it's time to retire. I didn't recognize Aaron Smith from the opening preseason game. He just wasn't the same player. I hope now that he rides off into the sunset, spends that time with his children. Another great football player, Brett Favre, maybe played 1 year too long, and maybe Hines Ward is into that situation right now. Hines Ward last year, after being a non-factor in the Super Bowl, as most of the Steelers players were, Hines Ward ended up on top in the offseason by winning Dancing with the Stars. I thought he was ready to transition into the next phase of his life, which is the entertainment, movies aspects. But right now, Hines Ward is no more than the fourth or fifth best receiver on the Pittsburgh Steelers team, and it's a shame that's the way he's going to go out this season.
Thanks for your points, Jim. We'll go to Andy now. Since he's our guest, we'll give him a little chance here to what's on your mind, Andy.
Well, I've got actually two things on my mind. The first thing I'm going to do is drop us down to the level of high school football here in Western Pennsylvania, which is where I spend a lot of time at this time of the year. And I guess my problem with that is that at the Quad A level, you've got about 28 teams there that operate in the Quad A division, and there's a tremendous disparity within the ranks of those Quad A teams. Every year, they have a playoff system that features 4 teams from each conference, and it's always the fourth team that's really dragging behind and probably doesn't even deserve to be up there at that level. They usually go in to the playoffs with maybe a 3-6 or 2-7 record, and they have to go up against the number 1 every year, and it's usually a slaughter at that particular first game. I think what the WPIAL has to do is take a look at that disparity and maybe reclassify the Quad A teams. Either go to a Super Quad or a Division I, Division II, and let some of these lesser quads play against themselves and maybe give them a little chance to win some sort of a championship. Because as it goes right now, it's always either the 1 or the 2 team in the conference that's going to win the Whitfield Championship. So that's on my mind. Also, in the world of boxing where I operate, I had the pleasure of meeting a guy that I knew a little bit about but never had the opportunity to meet him. Recently in Pittsburgh, we were visited by the one and only Buster Douglas. I was able to bring him up into the ring that night and get him to talk about his life. He didn't want to do it, but he agreed to. With him came John Johnson, the guy that actually is responsible for bringing Buster back out of the gutter after that tremendous win over Tyson. He became an instant celebrity, made a little money, but boy, he went downhill real fast. John Johnson brought him back from the dead, literally, and at this point, they're ready to make a movie about the guy and his life and his recovery. I really respect that, especially after talking to him and learning how firm and solid he was in making that recovery. Good man, Buster Douglas.
Thanks, Andy. We may go back to some of those boxing stories that you have there. That's one of the reasons we have you here with us. So thanks for bringing those two topics up. I have one short topic, then I'll bring up what's on my mind. I had mentioned a couple things about Pitt last week, and it seems like Coach Graham must have been listening to our show, because now he's going to do a run and gun offense. And he just come out with that today, so I don't know if it was because of us. Sort of doubt it, but maybe he was listening. And then the other thing is I was watching Monday Night Football, and the first game of the season, there was a team that looked like a Super Bowl contender. Then last night, Baltimore didn't look much like the same team that crushed the Steelers. So it looks like parity in the NFL is running rampant as you watch the games. So that was just a couple little points that I did have, and we'll carry on with the rest of the show now. Mike, do you want to take us into boxing? Or?
Well, everybody knows Jim and I work a lot of boxing matches. Jim's an announcer for a lot of boxing shows. Probably one of our favorite sports, boxing. And one of our favorite guys in boxing has always been Andy Sebastian. Andy's a great boxing announcer. On top of that, he's a great human being. He's always great to talk with. And, well, he probably knows more about boxing in Western Pennsylvania and maybe boxing in the world than anybody that I know. He's one of those guys that you can pull up to, sit down and talk to him. Owns a little restaurant out in Plum or on 286. And, you can go in there. There's boxing memorabilia all over the store. He's a great place to stop by. Andy, let me ask you something. Here locally in boxing, we've seen a lot of great fighters, a lot of great professional fighters, and we've seen a lot of good amateurs. Some make it a little bit, some not so far. But who do you think currently are the amateur boxers that you'd like to keep an eye on?
Well, number one, we got to keep an eye. Well, there's two boxers in particular. One's a female, by the way. The other is a young man, Sammy Vasquez, who came to us via the Monessen area, the home of Michael Moore, of course. And Sammy Vasquez is well on his way to making the Olympic team that's going to be fighting in London in 2012. He went into the service, happened to have won the all-service championship. At the end of that tournament, they get a fighter from the Marines, the Navy, the Air Force, the Army, and they go together for a national championship. And Sammy Vasquez was the ultimate winner. He's now in a position to maybe make the Olympic team and go over to London and fight for the United States. That would be the first Pittsburgh Olympian that we've ever had, to my knowledge. The other is a young lady who is making her way towards a possible spot on the U.S. Women's Olympic boxing team. For the first time in the history of the Olympics, they're going to have female boxing. We've got a young lady, her name is Tika Hemingway. I'm sure, Mike, you've seen her fight, and Jim, I'm sure you have too. She's a pretty tough cookie. And in her training regimen, she had formerly worked out down at the 3rd Avenue gym, and she refused to train with women. She wanted to train with the guys down there. And she was training with our newest local pro, Franco, and Franco told me, when you get in the ring with Tika, you got to forget she's a lady because she'll knock you out. And she fights at about 165. So that's one big girl. And she's strong, and I think she's got a shot to be on the first women's Olympic team from the US of A.
Well, as you know, I'm a huge Tika Hemingway fan. I'll tell you, Tika, like you said, she doesn't train with women, and what she does is she spars with 5 guys at a time. They'll come up one at a time into the ring and switch up round after round against her. When I was down at 3rd Avenue Gym one night, she started with 5 and ended up with 2 because she put 3 of them out. And when you're sparring with Tika, you not only have to forget she's a lady, you better forget that you're sparring because you're in a fight. And this girl is phenomenal. Personally, I think at one time she was probably the best fighter that I've ever seen come out of Pittsburgh. I never really saw Billy come, but I saw the movies. And I've never, I've seen Michael Moore, I've seen all the local champions. I think Tika Hemingway is the best. I'm not so sure what's going on with her right now. I know she fell into some management that I think was kind of taking her a little bit astray. But if she straightens herself out and she keeps her head right, she's for sure to make the Olympic team, and she's for sure to make the gold medal.
I agree with you, Mike. She's a physical specimen. She's put together, that girl. And as I say, she fights at a fairly heavy weight for female boxers. But she is an incredible boxer. She's quick. She's evasive. She slips punches. She boxes like a real good male boxer does. And I think she probably could make it in the male world, but they just can't let her fight because of the prohibition against women fighting men. But she's a personable person. She's very articulate, and I've had her come up into the ring and speak to the crowd. She really speaks well and represents the game tremendously. So she's got a lot of assets. If she happens to get into the Olympics, she'll be a superstar, I think. So I'm pulling for Tika.
Yeah. One of the things that she has going against her as far as the Olympics is that this is the first time that the Olympics will allow female fighters, but they're only allowing 3 weight classes. Tika's going to have to come down to middleweight to fight in the Olympics. Personally, I don't think that'll be a problem for her as long as she's been doing it gradually. They said she's a great fighter. And again, one of only a few here locally that are pretty good. Jim, you watch a lot of fighters here locally. Who do you think are people to watch?
As far as amateurs or professional?
Yeah, I see amateurs for right now.
Well, I agree with both of you guys. Tika's tremendous. I think a young lady out of Clareton, Sammy, she's another female worth watching. I tell you a guy that I thought earned his stripes. He's a little young yet, but I think that he has a chance if he wants to stick with it. Is Scott Bradley. Scott Bradley is our Golden Glove champion here in Pittsburgh, and not only did he win the Golden Glove championship here and fought for the state title against Philadelphia, but the 3 guys that he beat on the way to winning the championship were all outstanding fighters. So I think that he has a chance, and we have a few heavyweights that can throw a lot of bombs. So I think that the future is really bright here in southwestern Pennsylvania.
Well, Jim, I kind of like, and Mike, I kind of like this young man from Beaver County. Josh Himes is his name. He came into the game just a couple years ago, relatively unknown. He's a former high school and college football player, and he went through the ranks of the heavyweights in the Golden Gloves Western PA tournament and just blew through them. He went up to Johnstown, Pennsylvania, and got matched up with who everyone was picking to be a national champion in that division, and that was Anthony Pettis. Anthony Pettis was a great fighter from the Brockway area. I believe it's Brockway. His father, I believe, is a police chief up there. And everybody thought that it would be a quick victory for Pettis. Was just the opposite of that. Himes went into the ring and took him out pretty quickly and stunned everybody, and then went on to to 2 more knockouts, I think 1 or 2 more knockouts on his way to the Western Pennsylvania Golden Gloves Championship. He went out to the Nationals. He got through the first round and got stopped in the second round. He's got some potential. I don't know where he wants to go, but I know he's happy with that win. He did start kind of late in his life, but he's got a lot of potential. He is a well-built, strong individual, and he's got a powerful knockout punch.
All right, well, I'll tell you what, Andy, I also have to agree with you about Sammy Vasquez. And Sammy Vasquez is somebody I would love to have on the show as a guest. The only problem with that is he has an entourage of about 300 people that go everywhere he goes. And no matter where you go to the fights, it's sure to sell out because all his people are always there. Sammy's a really great talent, and I'm sure he'll do well in the Olympics also.
Let me interrupt you for a minute, Mike, if you don't mind. You brought up a good point. I love announcing for Sammy Vasquez. As you said, they travel with these black and gold T-shirts, and all over the shirts is Team Vasquez. And they are very, very noticeable in the crowd. They're vocal and they're noticeable. They really support that kid. His dad is kind of the leader of the pack, and he's an ex-Marine. He looks like he could get in the ring and fight just like Sammy, but he's been fun to watch, and he's a legitimate contender. I think he's going to go into the pros. He certainly has the ability to fight as a pro, but I'm sure he has on his mind trying to get himself into the Olympics.
And I hate to bring a little breaking news, but this just came across the wire, is Sammy Vasquez has signed recently in the last 48 hours a pro contract, and he's fighting on the night before Thanksgiving. So that's
Where's
just
he going to fight at, Jim?
breaking news.
Do you know where he's fighting at?
I don't want to mention the venue, but it is a local venue, and he'll be fighting locally.
Well, that is interesting news, Jim. I was kind of hoping he'd hold out to fight in the Olympics, but he's got the talent, he's got the ability, and now it's maybe time to cash in. I think that's probably what the motivation is. The opportunity's there. He's healthy, and he'll probably do well in the ranks of the professional boxers. And we have another young man who made that decision a couple years ago, Jesse Lubash. Mm-hmm. And Lubash is a former high school and college hockey player. He played his hockey at Duquesne University, and he was a good one. And he turned pro, and he was a state champion, along with his brother, by the way, his brother Jimmy, and he both won the state Golden Gloves together. That was kind of a neat thing. But he turned pro, and he's well on his way, too, to a very successful professional career.
And Al, Mike, at least we know people are watching. They text me the information about Sammy. So.
Well, that's great. We're starting to get a little contact from out there. And since I've watched boxing in the 70s and 80s, I went to some friends that they were actually boxing. So I'm not the expert that you guys are, but I did have a couple questions on what are the weight classes for the women. That you said there were 3, but for us people that really don't know the boxing sport, what are the 3 classes? You want to tell us? So
I don't know where to start. I believe it's going to be lightweight, welterweight, and middleweight.
Okay.
Now that's only for the Olympics, like Mike said before.
Right, but I mean that's new to me, and it might help some of the people listening that have that interest now that you have women in the Olympics, which is an interesting concept. And then Andy was touching on hockey at Duquesne. Well, I have to tell you, I did go to the Consol Energy Center, and I saw a game with the city game. Pitt was playing. They have a club hockey team who I personally know the coach. He's my cousin, Stu Rulnick, and I'd like to help him promote and get some of these players. He's from Plum, and he played Duquesne, and they won the game 4-1. This was last Friday night. And they're going to play again December 30th. I think it's against Robert Morris, one of their teams out there. And that'll be December 30th in the Consol Energy Center.
And so, Al, I think Stu, there haven't been too many professional hockey players come out of Pittsburgh. One of them being a Plum kid, R.J. Umberger, and I believe Stu had something to do with his coaching while he was playing at Plum High School.
Well, he told me he did have a little bit to do, but of course he's such a natural talent and he's such a nice gentleman. He still comes back and visits the school, and even contacts Stu and other people around the neighborhood. So he is a really good guy. And it is such a small sports world. Look, we're talking boxing, and somehow we ended up the club hockey here now. So who knows where we'll go next on this? Mike, do you have any ideas?
Where we'll go next on this?
Yes.
Didn't R.J. Umberger play for Philadelphia? How nice
Yes.
a guy could he be?
Yes,
Yeah, actually, I understood. Yeah, I understand he is a very nice guy. We talked a little bit about the local amateurs. We also got a lot of great local pro fighters, and Pittsburgh is really is a great boxing town. I don't know if you guys know this. I know Jim does. I'm sure probably Andy does now, but the rest of you, at one time, every world champion in boxing was from Pittsburgh.
Wow.
In every weight class. Pittsburgh has quite a history, going back to guys like Harry Greb, and then all the way up through Billy Conn, and now, like I said, now recently, people that we've talked about, Tika Hemingway. We've got a lot of great pro fighters from here also. My personal favorite, I think Monty Mesa Clay is the most exciting boxer that I've ever seen. And I've watched boxing, like Al said, through the 60s, through the 70s, through the 80s, and I think Monty Clay is absolutely the most exciting boxer that I've ever seen. I think he's fallen into poor management. I don't know why he's doing house shows at the casinos. If I was his manager, I'd have him fighting for a title on pay-per-views within a year. But I think Monty's a great fighter. I said maybe not he might not win the championships, but he's an exciting fighter, and he makes for an exciting fight no matter who he's fighting. Paul Spadafora from Pittsburgh seems to, he's fighting, but it seems like he's not quite getting that big fight. We've got a lot of upcoming guys like the Lubash brothers, Rod Sulka, and just a lot more. Andy, who do you think are the good pros to watch these days?
Well, I kind of agree with you too, Michael. Monty Mesa Clay is a great fighter. I had the pleasure of watching him play football, by the way, too.
Wow.
He was one of those little scat backs that Woodland Hills High School has become famous for. So he was a neat little football player, and he fit the mold of that little quick running back that Woodland Hills always seems to have plenty of, and then turned into boxing, and he's done well. He's also another very special sort of a guy. Anytime I've been to a fight that I've announced, he comes up into the ring, he talks to the crowd, he's very articulate, and then you ask him to stick around, he doesn't run out of the building. He stays, he signs autographs, kids jump on his back. It's an incredible demonstration of how he's given back to the game. So he's truly a champion in my mind. And I agree with Michael. He needs a little bit of some sort of a boost in management because he's being mismanaged a little bit, in my opinion, too. He's getting the wrong fights, but he does perform. Does perform well.
And I definitely agree. Monty Mesa Clay, which makes him so exciting, and like Mike said, is not only does he give you 3 minutes every single round, but he also has a unique style. He has his own style, and it's hard to figure out. And I just think that, he wears a T-shirt now that says, "In God's appointed time." And that's when, it'll happen for him down the road. I think a lot of people that watched him in the amateur days would not argue that the greatest amateur fighter of that era was Vaquan Kimbrough, who is not yet retired. Does anybody think that maybe Vaquan would have a chance against Monty, being that he was the better amateur?
Well, I always liked Vaquan as well. They were stablemates for a while. There was some sort of difficulty in the management, and they sort of moved apart from each other. Vaquan stayed down in West Virginia with Mountaineer Boxing, and Monty came back to Pittsburgh. I would love to have seen that fight. I don't expect it to happen now. I think they've gone so far away from each other now. I don't think it's going to happen. It certainly would be a good fight because they are friends, but they are competitors as well. I like Frequan, but if my money's on anybody, it's on Monty. I think Monty throws punches in bunches. He's got the best flurry of punches of any boxer I've seen. When he starts throwing that flurry, you're going to get 4, 5, 6 shots before you even know what happened. Yeah.
Andy, I had a question. If somebody was interested in getting started with boxing, where are the local clubs for these young people to go to? Because maybe somebody's just turning in or they hear about this and they want to know, where do they go to start training?
Well, if you're interested in sending a young person, male or female, by the way, there are a number of clubs in the city and in the suburbs. Excuse me. The Police Athletic League probably leads the league in terms of facilities. Jim Savetic is the director of the Police Athletic League, and they've got gyms all over the place, including several of the suburbs. They've got one out in Plum. They've got one in Punxsutawney. They got one up in Elwood City, and then they're in and around the city quite a bit. And it's a good facility to go to, and if one wants to box and learn the system, you actually can box and learn for free at the Police Athletic League gym if you're serious. Now, if you're in there for anything other than dedicating yourself to it, they're going to toss you right out. But to get the training that you might need, yes, the Police Athletic League's a good starting point. And then throughout the city, you've got some really nice clubs. You got South Park Boxing.
Oh, yeah.
They train out in the South Park area. You got Carrick Boxing Academy up on Bronzeville Road. You got Steel City Boxing. You have Homestead Boxing Club. So they're around and very willing to work with kids. Mark Mackey has the Exercise Warehouse in Bloomfield. So there's a lot of facilities to learn how to box. And they do welcome females as well.
Now, those are interesting things. I know a lot of people, that have kids that want to work out and stay in shape and even to defend themselves. So that could be a great opportunity. Do you just call the police academy and try to set up an appointment to go there then?
Well, you can find the Police Athletic League, PAL, they're known as, and they have contact information, and they can direct you to a facility that they're working with. Now, the Police Athletic League has to endorse and certify a facility, and I believe there's around 8 of them or so in and around the Pittsburgh area. So, yeah, just contact the Police Athletic League, and you can get yourself set up. And they've got some suburban locations as well.
I'll tell you, if I had a kid that wanted to box, I would contact either Darren Dolby or Dan Shaw. These guys, their facilities might not be quite as pretty as the Police Athletic Leagues or some of the other places that you mentioned, but they'll teach your kids to fight, teach them to box, they'll teach them some discipline. Darren Dolby trained Tika Hemingway for a long time. They call him Coach D. Dan Shaw trained Jaquay Lutz, who's another nice fighter. Those two guys they're very dedicated to what they do, and they're teachers. I think that's a good place to start.
And you can find Dan Shaw, by the way, out at the James 516 Boxing Club in Tarentum, Pennsylvania. And there's a great guy as well. That's a nice facility. That's where Jaquay Lutz honed his skills, who's now one of our local pros that we actually forgot to talk about. And he's got a good future. He was an interesting amateur for me to see because he had an unbelievable knockout punch as well. He would take, at the amateur ranks, I'd see him take a beating for a couple rounds. Not a beating, but he would be losing, and then he would finish it off in the third round. It was always sudden, and he was victorious. So he was a good, and I think he's undefeated as a pro now. He might have had 2 or 3 fights so far.
Andy, what weight class is he in?
Jaquay fights, I think, cruiserweight. Am I right, Mike? Yeah, he's a cruiserweight, somewhere around 170-something, which is a dangerous weight in the world of boxing because those guys are big and they're quick, too. So you better know what you're doing. You get in that cruiserweight division or that middleweight division. You're dealing with people that can punch and they can fly. So you better be good. You want to get in that league.
I got to tell you, I've never seen a fighter like Jaquay Lutz. He kind of, it seemed like he drifted through it. Didn't really seem like he was all that interested in boxing. He would get into the ring, and like Andy said, for the first round or so, he would just sort of, wander his way through it, take a lot of punches, and then when he decided he didn't want to get hit anymore, he'd throw one punch, and it'd be over. I seen him hit guys one time and them drop like they've been shot, and like people in the audience taking cover because they thought he was shot too. It's the guy was phenomenal. Just he kind of, they say he started with Dan Shaw, and then he I hate to call him a head case, but maybe a little bit of a head case, and they hooked him up with maybe the only two bigger head cases in the world, Roy Jones Jr. and Rayco Saunders. And personally, I think Rayco Saunders could have been one of the greatest fighters ever. Another guy that probably didn't have quite the best management, should maybe fell in with somebody instead of trying to do it himself. But physically, a great guy, a great fighter, skill-wise, a great fighter. Sometimes he took some fights probably that he shouldn't have taken. When you go to Tennessee and you fight Tennessee's favorite son, you can't win that fight unless you knock the guy out or cut his head off or drive a stake through his heart. You can't win a decision there, and Rayco knew that and would go down and take the fight anyway for the paydays. Well, but now he's got a good promotion. He's a decent promoter, and again, a great guy and a great fighter.
I did one of his shows for him. His first or second show, I'm not sure, but he recently had a nice pro show over at Station Square, and he was scheduled to fight that night, and his opponent didn't show up. So he got up in the ring, and he made a statement. He said, well, looks like my opponent might have a case of yellow fever or something. But anyway, he did well. It was a nice show, well attended. And after the show, I heard the commissioner tell Rayco that was one of the best organized pro shows he's seen in a long time. So it looks like Rayco may have a little career in its budding stages as a boxing promoter. I'd like to see that happen.
Do you think we'll have more fights in this area in the near future, where they'll promote this stuff and have local fights then?
Well, I think more fights are coming. I think the secret to that growth is what is the casino going to do? The casinos around the country are known as boxing venues. They have a leg up on anybody that wants to promote boxing. All the TV people are excited to do a show at the casino. It has a lot of appeal. The casinos love it. And I think once the Pittsburgh Rivers Casino, or maybe in Meadows, if they get involved with local boxing, they can push it right along, and that's just going to ripple down to the amateur shows as well. Although the amateur shows have been pretty active and popular.
Andy, to interrupt you, where are they being held at, these amateur shows, for us that haven't seen boxing for a while?
Well, let me tell you, I have 3 amateur shows I'm going to announce in November. I've got one out at the West Allegheny Fighting Academy in Imperial with Chuck Gerlach out there, the boxing coach and manager. I've got one coming at Dan Shaw's place, which is going to be a really, really good show. And then the Police Athletic League Black and Gold bouts, they're having a fight on November 12th at the Alcoma Country Club. It's now called the Three Lakes out in Penn Hills. They are quite active, and I know there's 2 or 3 other shows that I'm not doing, so I'm betting that in the month of November, there may be 6 or 7 pretty good amateur boxing shows. And I know one pro show coming, so that's a lot of action, I think, in the world of boxing in a town.
I'll say.
Yeah, I'm surprised. I didn't know there were that many shows or venues for the boxing here. That's great. Hopefully they'll keep building on that, and maybe the casinos will catch wind of this and start promoting them.
Well, for the amateurs and the Golden Gloves and stuff, you can pretty much do them anywhere. I mean, you can put them in a parking lot, take them out to the fairgrounds out in Butler. There's been a lot of places that these fights have been held, and then there's the local gyms like the James 516 that Andy talked about earlier. For the pro fights, the Rivers Casino Stage AE is probably going to be a venue for some pro fights in the future, and I wouldn't be surprised if the Console Energy started to pick up some decent fights. They're starting to become a pretty popular venue for a lot of different things.
And what's the difference between some of the different organizations? I hear the terms, a lot of people ask me about the Golden Gloves, the Silver Gloves, the USA Boxing.
Well, the Golden Gloves is the largest sports tournament amateur level in the United States ever. It's also the oldest tournament in the sports world. It started, I believe, in Chicago. I'm trying to think of the gentleman's name. He was a sports writer back in the 20s, I think, and it's never missed a year since that time. It originally was set up for New York to fight Chicago, and they were going to have a little sort of inter-city competition there, and then that kept growing, and all of a sudden you got this huge national tournament now that literally features every state in the United States. So that's the biggest of all the amateur tournaments. Now you have the USA Boxing Organization, which oversees all of amateur boxing in the United States. They run their own tournaments as well. Silver Belts is a competition more or less to the Golden Gloves, but not nearly as big. And that's becoming a pretty good event. So that kind of puts it in perspective. When it gets the national look or national attention, it's the Golden Gloves that, and if you go through the ranks of the gloves, you'll see a lot of former world champions that came up through the Golden Gloves, including one of my favorites, and that's Muhammad Ali.
Wow.
Formerly Cassius Clay as the Golden Gloves champion.
Well, since you went there, Andy, we talked about all the local guys. Who are the best of all time?
Well, in my opinion now, the best local pro I ever, I'd say, known about, I didn't see him fight, my dad saw him fight, was Billy Conn.
Wow.
I think Billy Conn had the opportunity to knock out the greatest fighter of all time in his era, and that was Joe Louis. And he was winning the fight, and we talked about this too. He was winning the fight throughout the entire length of the fight. He went back to his corner. His trainer told him to just dance with Joe Louis the next couple rounds, and you'll win this fight. But Conn thought otherwise. He thought he could knock out the big guy, and he stayed inside and got right in the center aisle with him, and Louis popped him and took him right to the canvas with one shot, and that was the end of Billy Conn's desire to win the world title. That happened to Michael Moore too.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
He got in the ring with George Foreman, and he was beating the heck out of him, and thought he could knock him out. Well, if you stand in front of Foreman too long, you're not going to be standing too long. And he got clocked by Foreman in that fight as well. I got to tell you a quick Billy Conn story. I went to school with his son, by the way. I'm a Central Catholic guy. And in Billy's retirement years, he lived over in the Squirrel Hill area around Beechwood Boulevard. There was a little convenience store on Beechwood Boulevard where he used to walk at night to get his cigars. Mm-hmm. As he goes over there to pick up some smokes, he's in the place at about 11 o'clock at night. He's standing at the counter. In comes a robber with a gun. He points the gun at the cashier. Now, standing to his left is Billy Conn, the world champion. Well, Billy took one shot at the guy, caught him in the side of his head, broke his jaw, dropped him to the floor. When the cops came, he was still unconscious. So that was a story that followed Billy Conn for a long time. Great story.
Thanks for sharing that with us, Andy. That is a great story. There's a lot of those Pittsburgh legends here that have boxed. I had a question for Mike. Where did you start your boxing career at?
Why, I used to go to a place in Wilkinsburg called Volker's Gym.
Oh, yes.
And I boxed in the Golden Gloves at the John Bassalone Club on Larmer Avenue when I was like 11, 12 years old. And that was my boxing career here. I did box in the Navy a little bit. And I don't know, if you're going to accept this or not, but the whole time I was in the Navy, Sugar Ray Leonard ducked me. Every time I was getting ready to get out of the Navy, he'd retire, every time I'd re-enlist, he'd come out of retirement. And you might call that a coincidence, but it's true. You can check it out.
I think I call it a coincidence and a little embellishment on your part, possibly.
What do you know? Anyway, yeah, that's something about the Billy Conn story. If that would happen today, that robber would probably have sued the boxer and made a lot of money off of it. Times have changed a lot. Well, as far as now, you said during your story you mentioned Joe Louis is the greatest heavyweight ever. I don't
his
know.
era. He said of his era.
I don't think. I think Muhammad Ali was the greatest ever in any era. I think he was a draft dodger and a coward, but that's beside the point. I think that he was definitely the greatest heavyweight fighter ever, but not necessarily the greatest fighter ever. And maybe sometime in the future we could sit down and go through all that, and each of us kick out who we think are the 10 best fighters of any weight class of all time.
Well, that would be a very interesting task to do, because, boy, there are some classic fighters out there over the years. I had the pleasure of meeting and talking to Roberto Duran, Hands of Stone, the famous fight with Sugar Ray Leonard in Montreal when he got on the cover of Sports Illustrated with the famous No Moss. And I did question Roberto about that statement, and he denied it vehemently. He said, I did not quit that fight. He said, and incidentally, I have a magazine with that picture of him sitting on the stool saying No Moss. He wouldn't sign it. He said, I don't sign anything, autograph anything for No Moss, because I did not quit that fight. The hotel I stayed in made me sick. Food poisoning. He said, I could not get out for the round when I was sitting on the stool. I said, that's it, I can't do this. I was sick. He said, I'd have spilled my guts all over the ring if I would have went out there. So he's convinced that, although he did say Leonard was beating him at that fight, but he said, I wouldn't have quit ever.
You know, I have no problem believing that somebody might have poisoned him before that fight, because I think Ray Leonard was one of the most protected fighters of all time, and maybe one of the most overrated fighters of all time. And one of the things that I'll point to show you that he was very protected is that he won one fight against Donnie Lalonde, and they gave him 2 championships in 2 different weight classes for that one fight.
That's true.
Now, that is true.
Wow.
And how does that work?
Could you explain that?
They wanted to build. Can I explain it? Yeah. They wanted to build him up. They wanted him to be the fighter that won the most championships in most different weight classes, which at the time he became, because he won 2 championships in 2 different weight classes for one fight. And it was against Donnie Lalonde. You might as well drive down the street and pick somebody out. You say, okay, this guy, we'll fight him.
But
am I wrong?
No, you're not. Sugar Ray Leonard was a darling to the media. He was a darling to the community. He was a Golden Gloves champion, if you recall, in the championship in the Olympics. He was wearing his girlfriend's picture taped to his boxing socks, and he went on to marry her. So he had a lot of really great media attention. And they liked him, and they wanted to see him keep going. He was, and he's a very articulate young man. He's also a great promoter. He's a good person. So, and the world of boxing needs a little cleaning up. Don King was dirtying everything up at one time, and guys like Sugar Ray were trying to take that back. But I like Sugar Ray, and I would believe that story, Mike.
Not only the Lalonde story is true, but in the first fight against Tommy Hearns, Leonard made a nice comeback. He won the fight, nice comeback. In the second fight against Tommy Hearns, Hearns knocked him down about twice around. He beat Leonard so bad that they had to call the fight a draw. They couldn't give it to Ray. But tell me that that's not true. Hearns beat Leonard like a dog in that second fight, and they called it a draw. So he was a very protected fighter.
And when you talk about the poisoning story, I never put that together. My God, he lost his first fight with Duran.
Yes, he did, badly.
And he was determined to avenge that loss. That next fight was critical to his career. I heck, to think that somebody would go that far, but the world's a bad place sometimes. So I could agree. But he's convinced he got poisoned at the restaurant at the hotel he was staying at in Canada.
And you talk about two of the all-time greats. I mean, people talking about Pacquiao now and Money Mayweather, but at that time, Sugar Ray Leonard versus Roberto Duran was very historical because at that time, the lighter weights didn't make any money. Sugar Ray Leonard brought money to the lightweight division, and him and Roberto Duran, what a great, great fight. The great Olympics with Howard Davis and the Spink brothers and all those guys. But Sugar Ray Leonard, in my opinion, was, for a pretty boy, was as tough a guy in that ring as he was a killer. Once he got you hurt, he got you out of there. And you look at the opponents that were hand-picked. They were all great opponents. And he was just a superstar and icon before the detached retina.
And Jim, that era also brought the attention away from the heavyweight division. Mm-hmm. The heavyweight division was having a lot of issues, probably due to Don King's activities, but they brought the attention away and brought money to that weight class. And we're also forgetting in that group was Marvin Hagler,
who Sugar Ray beat.
Who beat Sugar Ray beat. That's correct. But at that time,
I have a video of that fight between Hagler and Leonard, and in big block letters it says "Crime of the Century" on it.
Just in
Marvin Hagler beat him like an animal, and they, of course, gave the decision to Leonard. But Hagler should have known better. He should have went ahead and knocked him out when he could have in the 9th round.
Well, just to interrupt here, I'm getting a feeling that Jim and Andy sort of disagree with Mike on the opinion of Sugar Ray Leonard and how tough he was and how he was good for the sport. So I think we have a little dispute here. What do you think about that,
yeah,
Mike? You have a rebuttal for it?
I don't think this will be our last boxing show.
I mean, Andy and Jim are, it's their right to disagree with me. But I'll tell you what, the last time I was wrong was when I told Noah this storm is going to blow over. So, they got a lot of catching up to do.
Well, with a record like that, that's hard to beat, Jim. We're going to have to go to work.
I don't know. I'm taking a record on this show, and so far you guys are beating Mike by at least 2 or 3 to 1.
But one smart
You're
thing.
You're keeping score down there.
Yes, I'm trying to. Right. I got to moderate something here with these experts.
Well, the one thing that we can all agree on, that he was a smart businessman. A lot of people think that Tommy Hearns just came out of nowhere. Tommy Hearns was very well known. Sugar Ray Leonard would never fight Tommy Hearns, and he told everybody, I won't fight Tommy Hearns until the little kids in the playground is starting to ask when you're going to fight Tommy Hearns. In essence, until he's a household name, that way both of them will make big money. And when he fought Tommy Hearns and Sugar Ray Leonard fought, that was a big money fight. That was a pay-per-view fight. That was a mega fight. And it put both of their careers over the top. And Sugar Ray Leonard, you can't dispute the heart. During, like you said, Mike, you even admit the heart in that fight.
I agree with that, Jim. He was, to me, he was America's sweetheart, too. He was loved by a lot of fans and the media. The media loved Sugar Ray. He was their boy at the time. He was pretty. He was well-spoken. And he was doing, I think, he did the boxing world a service by bringing the attention away from what was going on up at the heavyweight level.
Hey, I got no problem with saying that Ray Leonard was a good businessman. He's not a bad fighter either. But he didn't beat Marvin Hagler. He didn't draw with Tommy Hearns, and he sure as hell couldn't have beaten me. So that's good. He was a smart guy. He stayed away from me. I don't blame him.
You're still sticking to that ducking you story?
Absolutely. I can show you the
I want to see some
dates.
documentation
I
on
can show you the
that.
dates.
Let's see some documents.
Aside from Ray Leonard, though, you brought up Marvin Hagler. I think Marvin Hagler was a great fighter. He was dominant in his division. Roberto Duran, another great fighter. He's dominant in his division. At that time, there was a lot of great lighter fighters. I like guys like Bazooka Limon, not quite as successful. Pepino Cuevas was one of my all-time favorite guys to watch. Again, always exciting, always great fights. Wilfred Benitez, another great fighter. There were a lot of good guys to watch during that time. But on on previous shows that we've talked about, I think probably the golden age of boxing in the heavyweight weight class was the 70s. In the 70s, you had some great fighters. You had Muhammad Ali, Joe Frazier, George Foreman, and then underneath them guys like Ronnie Lau and Jimmy Young, Ernie Shavers. There were always great fights, and these guys fought each other. Instead of fighting like tomato cans every week, they actually fought each other all the time, and there were always a lot of great fights to watch during that time.
And in that mix, you mentioned the name Ernie Shavers. There's a local connection there. Ernie, I believe, trained in Youngstown, Ohio. Am I correct? Or Steubenville, something like that. So Shavers had a pretty good local following as well. But I'm going to answer the question we talked about before, Mike, because I think I know what I think. The best fighter of all time, in my opinion, was Muhammad Ali. And I'll tell you why. He predicted what he was going to do. Almost every single time he did what he predicted he was going to do, he would take a good fighter, a decent opponent, and tell you when he was going to knock the guy out. And he would do it on schedule. And I always thought that was the biggest treat of all. I know they might have set that up sometimes, but I'm thinking that he was able to do that. And that's hard to do because your opponent knows you're bragging about when you're going to knock him out. Do you think he's going to let you knock him out? So, and he was really, I think, one of the best fighters. He was the most colorful fighter in the ring ever. He had, what's the big one? Howard Cosell, and he had some classic interviews. They were fun to listen to. And his Thriller in Manila, when he was punching the monkey in his hand and calling Joe Frazier everything but a monkey. And it's just great fights. So he by far, I believe, is the best fighter of all time. Certainly was the most fun to watch. I enjoyed watching him fight.
Did he win a championship fight without landing a punch?
That Phantom Punch was Sonny Liston.
Did he knock out Sonny Liston without hitting him?
Yeah, I guess he did, huh?
Who do you think made more money for that fight, Ali or Liston?
That's an interesting fight. That was one of his early fights.
It was.
And there was a connection there with some bad people, and there was a lot going on at that fight. I think his life was even in danger at some point while he was getting ready to set that fight up. Yeah.
Well, it seems like there's been a lot of bad people involved with boxing over the years. When you read the books, you watch the movies, watch the tapes, there's always a suspicion on some of it, and Don King brought that to a head there for a while with all the fighters he controlled on both sides of the card, which was amazing to me. Does that happen often today now with somebody promoting a fight will have both fighters?
I haven't seen anything like it since. There was nothing like it before. It was a situation that Don King moved himself in that direction, was able to take total control, which to me was, from a business standpoint, I don't know how he did it. I'm still wondering how he was able to manage to get on both sides of a championship fight.
That's why I'm asking who protected him to do that, because that's unreal. In a business, they try to break up companies that are monopolies. Here you have two fighters and one promoter. To me, that seems so outrageous on every level. And then where's the money coming from? Where's it going? What's the betting on all this stuff? So it's amazing that he got away with it for all those years.
Well, he had free run. There's no doubt about it. He reigned all over boxing for a long time. He was able to get the confidence of his fighters, the ones that he actually had management control over. How that happened, I don't know, but he was able to run their careers. He ran some of them out of money. I know that, and that wasn't pretty. I guess the two Spinks brothers are the best example of somebody cleaning them out, so to speak. I know that one of the Spinks brothers wound up world champion, wound up being a security guard at a McDonald's in East St. Louis.
Wow.
So
you hear so many of those sad stories. I mean, that is terrible. With all the effort, all the work they put in there, like you're saying, it's just a shame that that can happen to somebody like that. They get totally taken advantage of.
Well, you know, when there's a lot of money involved, Al, I guess that's what's going to happen. Billy Joel, who's one of my favorite entertainers, was cleaned out by his brother-in-law. Too much confidence in people. You give them too much power, too much authority, and all of a sudden, all the money's gone. And Joel wound up, not pennies, he's back performing now, but he certainly gave a lot of money away in that deal with his brother-in-law. So it happens. I think some of the athletes today are a little more involved with their finances, and I think they're taking care of business.
Well,
but it still happens.
We'd like to thank you for coming.
Oh.
We've got to kind of wrap up a little bit here. Thanks a lot for coming in. It was great talking with you again. Jim, great talking with you every week.
Thanks, Magic.
Al, it was a good show. Thanks for joining us. And, well, come back and see us next Tuesday.